Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hello and welcome to episode 238 of the Family Ministry Podcast. In this episode, I talk with Steve Cullum, friend of mine, student pastor, who actually grew his high school ministry through the pandemic, did not experience that in middle school ministry, which I thought was pretty interesting. So we just talk about his experience leading over the last, 18 months. So whether you lead in student ministry or children's ministry, I think you're going to find that conversation to be interesting, but I also have a big announcement to make. You're actually going to hear this before anybody else does if you listen to this podcast the day it comes out or Wednesday, because we're not going to announce it till Thursday. But the Multiply Ministry Conference is next week. You have already heard that probably if you're on our email list, if you've listened to the podcast the last few weeks. But the announcement is that Reggie Joyner is going to do one of the live sessions. So you don't get to hear from Reggie a whole lot at other conferences other than Orange and Orange Tour and all that. And certainly you want to follow him on social media, follow Orange Leaders. But he will be speaking at the Multiply Ministry Conference live, along with our other 6 live session speakers. And then there's 20 some on-demand breakout videos and content you'll be able to watch either next week or if you get the all access pass, whenever you want to make time for that. Go to multiplyministry.org to sign up. It's happening in just, I guess it's 8 days away. It's coming really fast. So you don't want to miss that. Sign up for that. Get the show notes for this episode at nickblevins.com/episode 238. Let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Steve Cullum about growing student ministry in the pandemic. Well, we have Steve Cullum back on the podcast. Welcome back, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Nick. It's great to be back. And we were just talking, it's surprising that it's been 2.5, almost 3 years.
I know. And how, on one hand, it feels like that, especially with the pandemic. And on the other hand, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like we spoke a few months ago or something, But it has been a while. So obviously a lot has changed, even with pandemic. But I want to, have you introduce yourself again for anybody who didn't listen to that first episode, but then tell us a little bit about how things have been going up until the pandemic, but, after we last spoke.
Sure. So, my name's Steve Cullum. I am currently the student pastor at LifeBridge Christian Church in Longmont, Colorado. And I've been here for almost 3.5 years. It'll be 4 years in July. And it's been a cool ride. Since we had last chatted on your podcast, things have definitely changed several times, but I guess I should probably, before I jump into any of that, tell you a little more. You can listen to the old one, I guess, if you want to. But I grew up in Illinois and grew up in the church and everything, but God really kind of grabbed my heart for ministry while I was in high school, and ended up going to Lincoln Christian College, which is now Lincoln Christian University, and got my bachelor's in youth ministry, and immediately went to seminary as well. There still at Lincoln, and my master's degree is kind of focused in youth and family counseling. And while I was there, God grabbed my heart for ministry outside of the Midwest, and ended up going out to the Boston area and southern New Hampshire and did ministry there at a newer church. When I came on board, it was 3 years old, and I was the first youth pastor there and got to build the ministry from the ground up, which was a really cool experience. Lots of hard work and lots of learning along that process, but it was really fun. And near the end of that 10-year run, God started stirring in my heart and showed me that it was time to move on. And so, He moved me and my wife out to Colorado, which was a cool experience, and as a whole, just to see God's fingerprints all over the plans, where my wife and I looked at each other, and she actually said near the end of the whole process, she's like, if I feel like if we say no to this opportunity, we'll be disobeying God. It was just that obvious that that's the move He wanted us to make. And so, I moved out here, like I said, 3.5 years ago, and got to step in a completely different experience. here at LifeBridge, where I was, brand new church, first youth pastor at my last church in New Hampshire, but jumping into a 126-year-old church at the time with lots of youth pastors that came before me, and it's been a learning process. It's been cool to see what God has done over the last 3 years, and like I said, things have changed quite a bit. I think from even programming structure and how we go about things since the last time we chatted. So if I remember correctly, we were still running, I think, Sunday morning ministry at the time, and doing separate, like middle school at 1 hour, high school at the other hour, and running small group, kind of large group, small group kind of based stuff. Similar to how a lot of different organizations, but I think Orange has been really instrumental in kind of setting up that kind of model where you teach large group and then send out for small group discussions. And so that's kind of how we were doing things at the time, but kind of just felt that God was wanting to do something a little different. And so I think right before COVID, so the school year before last, we had switched into doing ministry. Our weekly program and everything was shifted to small groups on Sunday morning, but we were running monthly large group experiences in the evenings. And then so during COVID, we shifted again and to our current model, which is actually everything on Sunday evening. Middle school and high school meet simultaneously, but there's some crossover. So the first Sunday of the month, we come together for a large group worship time, teaching, outreach focused kind of night. And then the rest of the Sundays on Sunday evening, we come together for like 10 minutes to kind of go over announcements and pray together. And then they're in small groups based on age and sex and everything the rest of the evening. So that's kind of our current model. But it's definitely, it's shifted and kind of went through this roller coaster of like, can we do this? Can we not? And then COVID came along and allowed us to make some jumps and some changes that we didn't really think we were going to be able to make in a long time. But then all of a sudden it just allowed that change to happen faster.
Now take me back to when you did small groups Sunday morning, monthly large groups at night, and they were separate though. So did you have like 2 a month, one middle school, one high school, different weeks?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
we did high school on the first Sunday of the month, and we did middle school on the third Sunday of the month. Which
Gotcha.
just so happened to work out for that specific school year where we didn't actually have to cancel or jump around any holidays or anything like that. That was
Nice.
just a fluke of the calendar that it worked out in our favor that year.
That's funny. That's nice. And then now, did you switch again before pandemic, or that is when you switched to kind of what you do now?
Yeah, we kind of did a little bit. So early in the pandemic, like a lot of people, we were scrambling a little bit. But what we ended up doing was continuing our small groups. So the good thing was that we'd put so much focus on our small groups happening on Sunday morning that it was a pretty simple shift for us to move online. And so we just said, hey, small group leaders, you have the material already, all the stuff, the resources to lead your groups. We'll help you get online, whether it be Skype or Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever. Come up with a solution for your group. But basically, we're expecting you to continue as we have been. You're just going to do it online instead. And we suspended the large group times at that time, just because. In the beginning, I think we thought, like a lot of people, it wasn't going to be, a year later that we're still figuring this thing out. So we were like, we can postpone or cancel, 1 month or 2 months of our large group events, but we'll keep those small groups going on. And that really worked out for the most part in our favor in the beginning, because I think a lot of youth groups were struggling to do the large group, the worship stuff online. It just wasn't clicking with students. But small groups were working pretty well in the beginning, and until it got old. Then we needed to rethink again. But at least small groups worked pretty well online in the beginning.
Yeah, ours did too. I would say we were not 100%, but we were probably 80, 85% of attendance with student groups online for like 2 months. And then it started tanking quick, 60, 50. It might even have been under 50 at some point. And I know a lot of people that never even got to 60, 50 online. And I think some of that was like, I don't know, but I suspect if you had a largely groups-based ministry like you do, like we do, then you were able to see higher percentages. If you were more of a large group-based ministry, then not so much, for the same reasons you said. But I love hearing about the different changes in programming, because I feel like, to me, programming for student ministry is like curriculum for children's ministry. At any point, half of the leaders are thinking about changing, is what it seems like. And so, and you've had some change, because a lot of times, I think it's the same in both worlds too. Not really, but there's a sense where in both ministries, the idea is you want something better, or to have some momentum or growth. And in student ministry, it's the schedule and the programming, and in kids ministry, it's the curriculum, which is interesting. And you went through a few there, a few different changes. Did you ever have combined middle school, high school again at any point with the large group part?
Yeah. So we, so going through the summer that's when, like you said, the 2 months was pretty good. And then all of a sudden summer happened, and we talked with our small group leaders, and we're like, you know what, this year, because of the circumstances, normally we kind of take a break and we shift up the programming in the summer and experiment with some different stuff. But we were like, this summer, let's try to keep our groups going, because I think it's really important for them to stay connected. And middle school groups hung on a little longer. High school groups pretty much tanked at that point.
That sounds right.
They were done. They did not want to participate whatsoever. And so for the months of really June and the beginning of July, we didn't really have a whole lot. But all of a sudden, we wanted to be able to do some sort of summer camp experience. And we had already planned on doing Generate Camp last summer, and we were going to be taking both our middle school and high school students to the same week of camp. They were going to have different experiences, but they were going to be at the same camp. And so we were kind of already thinking in that kind of mindset. And so we ended up partnering with Work Camp NE, which ran us alongside a few different churches, actually one in Maryland and one up in Massachusetts, I think, and maybe one in Illinois. So there's a bunch of different churches that came together online for that kind of programming stuff. But then we went out during the day to do service projects throughout the day. And so that week of camp was middle school and high school together. And we knew that it was an experiment. We knew that in the past, things like that didn't go well, but we just knew we needed to do something, and we didn't have the capacity to plan multiple events. And so we decided to try it. And that week was really helpful for us to see two things. One, that our middle school and high school students actually got along pretty well. And the second thing was that we needed to start meeting back in person again. And so it was actually high school students that said, hey, you know what, like, we're okay with the middle schoolers around. In fact, we want them to be around so we can actually invest in them and everything, because we remember when we were that age. And I was like, can you guys just please hold on to that thought as long as you can, because that's amazing to just be able to be thinking that maturely as a high school student. And so, yeah, it was our high school students that was really calling for us to meet together. And so from the middle of July on through when the school year started, we were meeting at the park together for large group experiences. And it was kind of more, very casual kind of, we get together, just play some games, kind of hang out. Student band would lead some like unplugged worship together. We'd have a student or one of our leaders kind of share a quick devotion, and then we play some more games, kind of hang out. Very, very casual, but it was attracting both middle school students and high school students, and they didn't care at all that they were there together. And we were actually being able to be in the park. We were like attracting, just random passersby, and we were right by the skate park. So they were kind of hearing what was going on too. And it was kind of having this really cool outreach moment as well.
That's cool. I think part of it, because a lot of leaders I've talked to, like where you are in the country determines a lot about your percentage attendance as like with your main services, so like you and I were talking before, my church, we've been gathering in person since September, started outdoor, moved indoor. And, we're 25% of our pre-COVID attendance with these in-person gatherings. So, the vast majority of people are still online. Now, there's certain parts of the country, though, where people will be 40, 50, 60%, of their pre-COVID attendance. But what's interesting is with student ministry, it's always much higher, it seems. Not everybody. I'm sure there's people listening who are like, gosh, I wish my student ministry was 60, 70%. But I hear it a lot. Like my friend Kenny Conley, when he was in Arizona and they launched in the fall, they were almost 100% of their pre-COVID with students, but not with their church. And then even up here up north, we're seeing that. I think some of it is, it's like what you just said, students want the community. They're not getting it anywhere else, so having this option is still appealing to them. And we definitely have some families who their students aren't coming, just they're avoiding everything in person. But obviously a bunch of them are. Now, when you went to kind of what you've been doing since fall, seems like you've experienced some growth in high school, middle schools, about, you say 75%. Tell us what the attendance is looking like. And I'd love to talk about high school and what you think the driver is there with some of the growth.
Yeah. It was really cool. Like, I love what you're saying. Just like, I think it really is about the community, because that's why I think we're seeing most of the growth, like, apart from God, of course, working, we always want to factor him into the equation as well. But I think on the other side of things, I think, what we're really seeing is these students, these teenagers are really longing for that community. And my wife and I thought back a few months ago, early last year, God really placed it on our hearts to really start praying for yeses to invitations. And we had no idea that he was going to use a pandemic to do that. But our high school students and our middle school students have been getting a lot of yeses to their invitations to their friends now. Partly because there's nothing else for them to do, but God's going to use that. And so we did see a lot of students that are just longing for community, and so they started coming, and so we, at the end of the summer, we were probably about, I'd say 50 to 60% of where our attendance was overall, pre-pandemic. And since then, it's just continued to grow. We did see a dip in our younger middle school students when we started in the fall. And I'd attribute that to two different things. I think one, that a lot of our incoming sixth graders and even seventh graders, they're coming from very young families who were playing it a lot safer than some of the other families. So that was just our community and how the young families were processing all this. And then secondly, what the pandemic did to us, and quarantine specifically, was it killed our handoff from kids ministry to student ministry. And so normally we try to make that a really good handoff as best as we can from our incoming sixth graders, and we just weren't able to do anything special for them. And so we, I think, missed some of those in the handoff from our kids ministry. So we're trying to make up for that now. But those are kind of two factors that I think kind of hindered our momentum with middle school. But since then, things have started to grow. So currently, our middle school is probably about 75 to 80% what they were pre-pandemic, which has been really cool. And that a lot of that growth has actually happened within the last 2 months with middle school, because families, I think, are finally starting to get connected and feel comfortable. But our high school is actually roughly doubled what it was pre-pandemic, and which is really shocking to me and exciting at the same time. And so for the first time in a long time, our high school ministry is bigger than our middle school ministry here at the church, which is normally not the case. Usually middle school is, the place where students are, more engaged and everything. And then they kind of, step away during high school. But our high school is actually outpacing middle school right now.
Yeah, and it's the same here. I think where you are is very similar to here, even though you're out west there and I'm on the East Coast, where middle school is always bigger here, even though high school has one more grade. I do find that, like, when Kenny was in Arizona, or friends I have in California and in other places out west, a lot of times high school can be bigger, and that's because middle school, sometimes it's junior high, it's just 7th and 8th grade. So it's 4 grades compared to 2. But out here on the East Coast, and probably similar to where you are, middle school is large because of the fade. Like they start less and less attend, they get more freedom, they have more choice. But our high school has been bigger too throughout pandemic with groups, and some of it is probably the bigger need for community. Some of it is the established community. Like, I'm thinking about when you said some of the younger middle school, we've probably experienced that too. And in our world, they had community as kids in 5th grade. However, it was divided across 3 services. So it's not, you know what I mean? So it's not like they all knew each other. And if you change services, it's even, even less community. Right. So as opposed to like a group of 10th grade guys been together, for 4 or 5 years, it's established, you know what I mean? Yep. So it would make sense to me that a lot of churches are probably losing some middle schoolers in the transition there. Yep. Interesting. So what do you think, have most of those students you think come from the outside, like new to the church in that high school growth or internally or what?
Yeah, a lot of them have. I don't know our numbers off the top of my head, but anecdotally, I think it's somewhere around probably 30 to 35% of our growth has been brand new students, coming from invitations from their friends. And the cool thing was, I think before pandemic, we did struggle with a backdoor issue. We had visitors, but they didn't really come back very much. So we've tried to work on that a little bit, but I think the pandemic has also allowed us to naturally keep students a little more because they are longing for that community. And it's been cool too, because like we've had several baptisms recently, and of those students that have been recently, dedicating their life to Jesus, half of them have been brand new students that just started coming within the last couple months.
That's awesome. Do you think some of the growth is frequency of attendance, like the high schoolers that were coming, but now they're actually more regular, or no?
I think some of it is. Yeah, we are seeing some more frequently attend, and that has actually been the highest amount of that number, I guess, has been in our older high school guys, which is probably the area that we're seeing the most growth. And
interesting.
It is really interesting and really shocking in a really good way. And I can't put my finger on why, but we've always struggled with, and I think a lot of other youth groups do struggle with, like older high school guys. They're the ones to first check out. As soon as they get their license, they can get jobs. They're into sports and everything else, and it just pulls them away from the church. But I think with the lack of those other things going on, we're seeing an influx of older high school guys that are really want to be there. They're connecting. They're coming back consistently. They're inviting their friends. They're hanging out afterwards and playing in the gym, and to the point where I have to kick them out at like 10 o'clock at night. And guys go home. I know you got school tomorrow, and I really am tired. But like, not only are they coming back, but they're wanting to stick around the church longer, which is I can't put my finger on exactly why, but I think a lot of it really is like, they would never say this because they're high school guys, they're cool and everything, but they were longing for that community. And that's the same group of guys. They were the first ones to check out when they were tired of doing groups online. They were the first ones to go, nope, we don't want any of this at all. And at that point, I thought our high school ministry was tanking. I was like, well, okay, we're going to have to build it back from the ground up. Once, the pandemic continues on and we're able to jump back into programming. But they were the first ones to jump back in as well. And so, while they would never admit it themselves, I think what they really were longing for is that in-person community and connection that they have with their brothers in Christ.
Yeah, think like you said in the gym there. I mean, you've got just conversations, hangout time for fun. All of that's gone. Been gone, kind of, unless you do it yourself. Like you get your friends together. And even then, how many people are getting 10 friends together? Right. They're just, a lot of them aren't. It's just not happening. So, and when you were talking about older high school guys being, one of the bigger growth areas, I was thinking to myself, that's usually the biggest attrition area, right? Yep. It's the 11th, 12th grade guys that usually are the ones that are disappearing the most when they get to that age. That's interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. That's great to hear that you guys have been doing that. And groups, that's why, we're both big fans of a groups-based ministry for kids and students, because this is why.
Absolutely.
If I think about even the adults in our church, our adult groups are not what they were pre-pandemic, but they're down like 10 or 15%. So they're 85%, of what they were. Whereas the church, again, in person, He was way down. Even the view, how do you measure online? It's so hard. But even if you try to measure all that, I still think it's down. Like, I don't think if all the people that are watching online attended in person, we'd be at, 100%. We wouldn't. But it's interesting how the groups part has just helped people stick. Absolutely.
And I think that's what one of the big things that I've, God's been teaching me a whole lot. I think about the bigger church as a whole, and I'm far from an expert at all, but I think like one of the things that he's reminded me of, and I think a lot of other people as well, is the importance of groups, because that's where that connection, that's where true discipleship really happens, is in that kind of experience. And honestly, like, you can view hundreds, if not thousands, of churches online, and you can attend, virtually attend whatever church you want at any point and listen to a really good message, listen to some really good music, and sing along if you want to at home. And that's it. But there's very few things, if anything, that can really replace getting together with some other like-minded people and just really digging into scripture together and figuring out, okay, what does this actually mean in my life? And how can I share with each other and keep each other accountable? All those things that happen in a group. And especially right now, like, where students are like in the middle of processing so many things, like as teenagers, especially high school students, like, not only do we have a pandemic, but we have horrible racism issues in our country and in the world. And what's that mean for me? And all the other, plethora of things that have happened within this last year that made 2020 and now 2021 some big hard times for students. And they need those places to kind of process that. And I think once they may not have ever realized the importance of groups, maybe until this time.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you feel like you've been learning that God's been teaching you through the season, or even like you host the student ministry podcast? Like, what has some of the conversation been on there?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the idea of perspective. I think God's given us a lot of perspective recently, and that's kind of a lot of the conversations we've had on the student ministry podcast has been very much around perspective and what that perspective has allowed us to do in terms of our priorities. Where are we really putting our effort in terms of our ministry? And it really comes down to kind of asking, I think, that big why question, like, why are we doing this? And what's the most important things that we can be doing? Because there's so many things, I think, in ministry, that in the church world that we find ourselves doing. But if we kind of take that step back and you're like, why am I even doing this? Like, what's the point? And maybe it's a good thing, but it's also a lot of things that we've done just because we've done them for a long time. And so it's allowed us to really reshape and refocus and reprioritize the most important things. And so, we had conversations with, I had a conversation a couple episodes ago with Greg Steer of Dare to Share Ministries, and really focusing on, how are we training students to send them out to share their faith? That's one of those tentpole things that really, like, God's been kind of reshaping my thoughts process around what is student ministry. And I think in some ways it should be a training ground. And I think the church as a whole could be that as well. But a training ground to get students, like, help them understand their faith enough, but also equip them and empower them to take it outside the walls of the church. And so, Greg Steer talks a lot about, how to empower them, especially to evangelize to their peers. I think a lot of our conversations have kind of been around reprioritizing based on the perspective that we have gotten recently.
Well, and in church-wide, a lot of times student ministry is where, like, some innovation happens that then becomes the church. You know what I mean? Because student pastors become campus pastors or church planters or pastors. And our church, my pastor was a middle school pastor for like 11, 12 years, then was a student pastor. And his church, that church grew from 300 to 3,000 while he was there. So he learned a ton. And sure enough, our church, when we started it 15 years ago, was a lot like the student ministry he led. You know what I mean? And that was a good thing. That's part of what helped us reach people who were not a part of any church. And so that a lot of that could be happening right now in student ministries, right? That we're going to see play out in churches here soon. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I want to ask specifically about camp. You'd mentioned what you had done last year for camp. What are you thinking this year? I hear people asking that all the time, both in kids and student world. Like, what are you doing this summer for camps?
Yeah. So actually, I forgot to mention this, but what we just did, and this will lead into what we're thinking about for summer as well. We normally partner together with like 25 or so other churches in the Colorado area and do winter camps together. And so we have like 5 different weekends split up between middle school and high school, and we go to a couple Young Life camps in the mountains, and it's an awesome experience. But couldn't do that this year, and so the students are like begging, "Hey, can we do winter camp? We need to do winter camp." And I was like, "Okay, guys, I don't know." And I'm a planner. Like I would love for us to know not only what we're doing this summer, but I would love to have a good idea of what we're doing next summer and everything in between. And so what the pandemic has done for me is like just shot that completely out the window. Like I don't know.
I can tell you next week.
Yeah, maybe. And even that I have to hold, loosely. And so I kept telling the students, like, I don't know what the restrictions are going to be and all that sort of thing. So we ended up being able to plan a winter camp experience at our church. So we did on location, and we planned it about a month and a half out, which was so nerve-wracking and so crazy, but we were able to pull it off. And it was a really good experience. And looking at numbers and everything, we had about 125% based on last year's winter camp this year.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, so that was really cool. We did everything ourselves, and it was a really cool experience. We had an awesome team that were just able to create a really cool camp experience at our church, and it was fun for a lot of different reasons. Some of the students like really now they feel comfortable in our church, and they didn't before. So hopefully that's going to play into the long run as well. But all that to say, our students were actually begging us, "Can we do this more often?" I was like, you don't have any idea how much planning and preparation it took to pull this off well. I don't know if I could actually do it well every quarter or whatever what they're asking for. But we are going to look at maybe should we do stuff like that that's just our group maybe on site or something like that on a regular basis. So we're maybe looking at like a fall retreat or a spring kind of event that's like an overnight sort of thing. But so if that can happen, that will allow us to go hopefully back to a regular summer camp this year. And so as of now, we're still planning on doing Generate Camp through YM360 at Estes Park, which is right down the road from us, which is really cool. And running middle school, high school, like that separate experience, but same camp sort of deal. And hopefully we'll open registration up in March, and we'll see how it goes. I think a lot of the students are really longing for it and everything. So if we can pull it off, and if nothing drastic changes within the plans, we should be able to still do quote unquote a traditional summer camp this year with Generate.
When you said you had like a month and a half to plan it, it was like crazy, last minute. There are leaders listening. You're like, month and a half is great. Like even pre-pandemic, it's fine. You can do anything in a month and a half.
That's true.
Did students sleep in their did they stay in their own homes for that winter camp, or did they group up and stay in homes, or was it all?
We actually stayed at the church. Yeah.
Okay.
For summer camp, they stayed in their own homes because at that point we weren't sure, it was a smart decision to have them together. Some of them did group up and stay at each other's houses on their own, but yeah, we allowed them to stay at the church. However, there was an option for parents to pick them up if they opted for that. That was totally okay. So we had pickup times and drop off times the next morning if they opted for that. But the vast majority of them, I'd say 90 to 95% of them, stayed at the church. So we had all the guys sleeping on the floor in the gym where they were able to completely spread out and have plenty of room to take their masks off and be more than socially distant in the gym. And then we had the girls down at the opposite end of the building in our fellowship hall, which is about the same kind of size of a room, and so they were able to do the same down there.
Cool. Yeah, I know a lot of people are wrestling with what to do this year with all that stuff. So that's interesting. Cool. Well, how can people, connect with you with the student ministry podcast? You release episodes about monthly, right? I know sometimes it might be more than that.
Yeah, occasionally monthly. we'll do 2 a month. One to 2 a month. They can find that at just the website is thestudentministrypodcast.com. But then we're also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. You can easily just search in most of the podcasts out there, the apps out there for Student Ministry Podcast. You could also just search for my name, Steve Cullum, to find the podcast. And if you want to just connect with me personally, I'm at Steve Cullum on most of the major social medias out there, and that's SteveCullum.
Yep, and you got a website as well where people can link to those different things. Have you noticed? I didn't notice this till just a little bit ago. I don't know what I was searching for, but I realized that a lot of podcasts in our world, and kids and student world, have not continued to update through pandemic. And I get it. I've never missed more episodes ever, than I have now for the same reason probably. But I was just very surprised that if you go through how many hadn't updated in months, which is interesting.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it is interesting. It actually leads me to one thing that I did. I wrote down a note earlier when I was thinking through what we're talking about today. And I think, and I don't know if this is the case for other podcast hosts, so I apologize, if you're listening and you're like, that's not me. But one of the things that I have noticed is a lot of people, I think, have struggled through this pandemic for pacing, like personal pacing of themselves. The idea of because we're all online a lot more, it's a lot easier to compare to other churches and other ministries and stuff like that. And so that's I think a lot of us have forced ourselves into doing more at different times. And so I'm guessing in the process of our personal ministries and everything like that, that maybe our podcasting has tended to kind of fall to the wayside because we're trying to keep up with everything else that has changed within the last year.
Yeah, I could get that. I mean, because even we were joking about before we recorded about how my kids are probably going to yell and interrupt this podcast, which could still happen, by the way. And I guess that is true being home all the time because I could work in the office, but still mostly from home. In some ways, it is harder to block out the time for a podcast or whatever it is. And I was surprised at that. I mean, on one hand, I'm sure some podcasts are getting listened to more. Mm-hmm. I actually listen to less because a lot of my listening was when I was driving. Yep. So much of that's gone,
Same here.
which I hate, not what I want. But I know I know Carey Newhoff's has grown a lot as if it wasn't already huge. He's continued to see growth. Mine hasn't declined. I don't know that it's grown either, maybe a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I just don't check that often. But when I checked, I thought I was ready for it to see listenership has gone down. But it did surprise me to see how few have continued to stay updated. So
yeah,
good work there. Keeping that updated because I think people still want to know what's going on in other churches, like we just talked about here. What are you doing? What are you seeing? What's your experience? What's working? What's not? Because things are changing so much. Like we're joking about every week. It's okay, how do I deal with that? I think people do want to hear from other people. So cool.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you're keeping that one up.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And I'd encourage people, not to compare as well. You may hear I didn't want to necessarily, I don't like necessarily talking about, the idea that our high school ministry has doubled in size because I know other ministries that's a really big struggle. And you're like, really, Steve? Stop bragging about that. Well, number one, I'm hopefully, diverting that bragging. I'm bragging about what God is doing. But I know that it's all based on the circumstances. It's based on your culture. It's based on the area of the country. It's based on your age of your church. It's based on what is happening from week to week. It's based on the parents. There's so many other factors in there. So make sure that you're not comparing to other people as well, because everybody's situation is different. Yeah.
I mean, we've needed this always in the church world, especially when we care too much about the attendance and the numbers and the giving and the whatever. Mm-hmm. But more than ever, we need to be reminded of the appropriate level of care. Sometimes I'll call it care's not the right word, but we can only control so much. So that's the part that we should focus on. And and if it was already a small number, it's even lower with pandemic. Mm-hmm. So how can we just be faithful with what the control that we do have, what we can do, and lean to God for the rest, and not carry it. Because think about how many I was just talking about this with a friend. Think how many lead pastors are just carrying the burden of these lower numbers. And it's like, well, one, that's not reality. You got a lot of people watching and engaging online. And two, we're not responsible for somebody else's disciplines of watching online or attending in person or being in a group or whatever. We do our part. We just can't carry too much. We can't carry beyond our level of control, I guess is probably what I'd say. So I'm with you, man. Don't hear other experiences. And like our student ministry is not double in high school, but like I love hearing about your experience, and I'll learn some things from it. Like I wonder if there's a way to change up and make community even more important, or even have some kind of small gatherings and things. We did recently. My student pastor had a great idea to rent a theater. I don't know if I think this is all over the country, where you can like rent a theater for pretty cheap and have up to 20 people in there. And a lot of times it's older movies. In fact, I think it's mostly that. And so every one of our groups is doing it with students, and it's been awesome. It's been great, so it's been a lot of fun. And
some of the ones around us have been have just recently being able to rent it out and play video games on the big screen. So,
oh my gosh, that's
you want some high school guys? Cool. There you go.
Yeah, that's true. That'd be a great idea. So you just take away some things like that, because again, like we can control some of that. We try it out. If it works, great. If it doesn't, it's okay. So it's easy to say. It's hard to do, though, right? To say don't carry that burden. But we know what the truth is, that we can't carry that. We can't fall in that comparison trap. So that's a good word. Well, thanks for taking time to come back on the podcast. It's been too long. We'll have to not make it 3 years next time. And people can connect with you, find you online, all that stuff. Thanks, Steve.
Yep. Thanks so much for having me back. And pray God's blessings on all you're doing, Nick.
Well, it's great to talk to Steve again and to catch up. It's so interesting, ministry is, isn't it? I mean, we do not control the outcomes. We barely control most of the inputs, and here he is leading that student ministry, seeing growth in high school, not necessarily seeing it in middle school. What his middle school experience is more like what my church had and what most churches I talked to had. And it's still interesting too, that student ministry of all the areas of the church is the one that seemed to, maintain most of its momentum, or at least stay close through the pandemic, compared to, church services started like ours with 20% of their pre-COVID attendance, and small groups may have went up or declined depending on what that looked like. Children's ministry in person was, again, 20 to 30% for us until it grew up past 50%. So it's just interesting. Some action items I thought of coming out of that interview. One is to gather students in smaller groups. Maybe it's pandemic related, or maybe that's just because it's a great idea to have relational connection with students that you can't get if you've got a ministry like his size and all you're doing is larger events. And hopefully they've got their own small groups and all that, but there's just something about investing in students on a more one-to-one level, even though it may not be one-to-one. Maybe it's, you as a student pastor takes out the 6th grade guys group and the group leaders come, but you're there too. There's just a lot that can happen there. Summer is a great time to do that, but fall is a good time to do that as well. 2, focus on students inviting their friends. Now's a great time. I mean, it's always a good time for students to invite their friends to ministry, right? But just like our students in our ministry, all students, all teenagers have been isolated in so many ways over the last 18 months. And how great would it be for them to invite their friends to a place where they could actually get connected? And 3rd, empower your volunteers more. So get more involved with students relationally. If you're a student pastor, gather them in small groups, like the first point. But to this 3rd point, empower leaders to own more, to have more authority so you can delegate more. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about, the Multiply Ministry Conference. Really excited to have Reggie Joyner share a live keynote session at the conference. But I'm also really excited that there's 30-some voices and topics all about empowering volunteers, something I'm pretty sure pretty much all of us could do a better job at and is more needed now than ever. So sign up at multiplyministry.org. It starts in 8 days from now. It's August 25th and 26th, Wednesday and Thursday, 12 to 4 p.m. Eastern. The first 2 hours, 12 to 2 Eastern, is the live portion. And then the second 2 hours each day is allotted for you to watch the on-demand breakouts. And no, you're not going to watch all of them, but you're going to pick which ones might help you the most in your ministry and in your context. So go to multiplyministry.org to sign up. Grab the show notes. If there's anything you wanted to get that we talked about in this episode, you can get that in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 238. I'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.